Arts Council. Beautiful museum. I am Jemima Har, the Executive Director of the Humboldt Arts Council, as well as this beautiful museum, the Morris Graves Museum of Art that we're in today. And it's so wonderful to see all of you. This is truly, since the pandemic, the first event that we have people here. I mean, even Arts Alive has been really, really slow. So I'm so thrilled to have all of you here. And this is a really big deal. And we've been working for months now together. And I'm so thankful for Leslie and the Ink people and everyone for being here today. It's really, really exciting and great to have a partnership. And I'm sure we'll get to introducing everyone, but it's been great working with Tracy as well from Californians for the Arts and Eliza from the Nevada County Arts Council. So we kind of have two different things that we'll be doing here today. We've got the listening session as well as we'll be talking about the California Creative Corps, which is a really big deal for our area. So I'm going to turn it over to Leslie.
Great. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for all you bring to the community and for all of the knowledge about the community that you're bringing into this space. So just really want to value and recognize that. And of course, it's been really fun coordinating this with this really fun team of local people with Jemima and then, folks from Sacramento and LA and Nevada County. And it's just really neat to have this convening here together of all these ideas converging. I do want to take a moment for a land acknowledgement. Hawalu. I want to acknowledge that we are here on unceded Wiyot land and honor the ongoing relationship of Wiyot people with Jarujiji, Wigi, and surrounding places. I also want to acknowledge the Talawa, Karuk, Yurok, Hupa, Wiyot, and Pomo peoples of the Redwood region. We have deep gratitude for the vitality of Indigenous peoples and ways of life that is alive and active throughout the region. We also recognize the labor of Black and Brown people and bodies who are forced to toil for the benefit of colonial power. We recognize the contributions of Chinese people and the Eureka and Arcata Chinatown districts. We celebrate and honor the rich contributions of diverse peoples to our communities. And so with that, I will turn it over to Tracy. Thank you so much, Tracy, for being here.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Oh, my goodness. My name is Tracy Hudak. I'm the manager of programs and organizational advancement for Californians for the Arts for Southern California. And in just a moment, I'll introduce you to your Northern California, my counterpoint part. But first, I just want to express on behalf of the whole Californians for Arts team, our gratitude to all of you. This is our first ever in-person regional conversation. I'm emotional about it because our partners made it possible and you all made it real. And so this is really magnificent. And we'll tell a little bit more about the significance of the conversations and what they mean to our work in just a second. But just wanted to thank again our partners, Jemima and Leslie, and also Allison Weir, and then the Humboldt Arts Council, the team at Ink People, and the Arts Council of Mendocino County for their, yes, let's do this spirit that made this happen. And then also acknowledge Eliza Tudor, who is a long-term and beloved board member, Californians for the Arts, with her hat on, and thank her for bringing the Upstate Creative Corps listening session here. With her other hat on, Eliza is the executive director of the Nevada County Arts Council, and her team is developing that program for your region. So we're really excited to have that here too as well. And we'd also like to thank Juan and Clay of Access Humboldt for designing your experience of this event through audio visual tech wizardry. Like, they're amazing and we're very grateful. And they're recording this for us. So this will be available for you to share with your community, and you'll receive slides in the recording based from your registration to the event. And Just to acknowledge, we're bridging the Zoom and the in-person world for the first time. So we might need your patience as we stumble through any glitches. Thank you for that. So to kick off our program, I'd like to introduce from our team, Kara Q. Smith. She's the manager of programs and organizational advancement for Northern California, and she'll be featured on the Zooms there, and she'll kick off our program for us. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kara Q. Smith. As Tracy said, Tracy, thank you for that introduction. And it's really wonderful to be here virtually, and sorry that we can't all be here in person. But you do have the CFTA team with you in this Zoom space, and everyone, I'll just do a quick run through of who's with you today. If you may not have great visibility, but you'll be able to hear it. Julie Baker, our CEO, is here, as well as Terry Ball, our grants manager, whose power just went out. So if she's not waving, that's why. As well as Eduardo Robles, our manager of communications and field engagement. So on behalf of all of us, as well as Tracy, who you're lucky to be in person with, we are just really grateful to be here and kicking off our first ever in-person regional conversation. So regional conversations have been happening virtually across last week, and then we have our Northern California virtual conversation for the entire northern region on Friday, but this is a special in-person regional version, and so thank you for being here for that. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about the agenda for today. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. Californians for the Arts is going to kick it off with be able to share this space with you, offer you some updates around advocacy and policy priorities, both from Californians for the Arts as well as California Arts Advocates. And then we'll have a chance to hear a bit from you. We're going to facilitate some listening. We're going to try to make that as seamless as possible, but we hope to hear from you. And then there'll be a break, and then you'll move into hearing about some local initiatives and some regional initiatives that are really exciting, as well as the California Creative Corps listening session. And then you all there, not us here on Zoom, will get to close out the day and also have the ability to convene afterwards at Humboldt Bay Provisions. And so we wish we could be there for that. But with that, we want to move into the advocacy updates, and I'm going to hand this over to our CEO, Julie Baker, for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kara. Thanks to Tracy holding down the fort there in upstate California, North State California. We're so grateful. Of course, it totally made sense that Tracy, who lives in Southern California, should be up in the north part of California doing this, but it's just how it goes sometimes. And we're so grateful for all the work that she's done put into that and to represent us on the ground there. And to Liza Tudor, who's there on behalf of our board, and also, of course, is the California Creative Corps initiative, which we're really excited about and we'll talk about as well. And I think I've met some of you here and there, and I am Julie Baker. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and today I come from the unceded land of the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan, otherwise known as Nevada City, California, about an hour outside of Sacramento, and also where Eliza lives. So we have two organizations. We have both a lobbying organization, which is California Arts Advocates, and that's where we really work to influence public policy, the legislature, the administration at the state level to support work and resources, to support the work and to provide the resources for our industry, arts, culture, and creativity. At Californians for the Arts, we're a C3, a nonprofit organization, and that's really where we're working to give you resources to be effective as local and state and federal advocates on behalf of the sector, as well as to be the bridge to what's happening at the state and federal level in terms of public resources that we've been fighting for on the C4 side, so that you can access them and be sustainable as an industry in your community. All right, next slide. So just quickly, I'll go over some of the recent wins we've all had together as advocacy organization, and you as our advocates, helping us to realize over $600 million invested into arts recovery in the last 2 years. It was really the year prior to this year that we worked in coalition with National Independent Venues Association, the California Association of Museums, to get to have the state recognize that we were a hard hit industry and that we needed specific relief recovery funding from the state. And so we'll talk about where those funding allocations are currently and how you can access them. And then we were really excited to be the primary author of the first ever creative workforce bill in the United States, authored by Senator Ben Allen. And this is, again, something we'll touch more on in the presentation. We also realized $30 million in cultural districts funding, which I'm not in the room, but I'm hoping you're clapping because I know you guys in that area are a cultural district in Eureka. And it's really exciting to see finally an unfunded, what they call an unfunded mandate from 2015. Took 7 years for us to finally see $30 million invested in that program. So if someone says advocacy is a long game, we're not kidding. It's a long game. This year, we also saw $25 million in the budget to arts and parks. We'll talk a little bit about that. We saw the governor sign just in end of September, the Equitable Payroll Fund, which is Senate Bill 1116. And this is really in reaction and response to the impact of Assembly Bill 5, which changed employment law. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about $20 million more in cultural institutions funding and expanded eligibility if you're a live venues venue. And I also just wanted to mention who just came on board, she's going to give out a wave here, is Terry Ball, who's our grants manager for a bunch of programs you're going to hear about in a second. And then Artists Are Second Responders is a message that we really developed in the last several years that helped to build a narrative around the important work that artists do in our communities. And it really made sense to a lot of legislators and to the administration, to the point where they actually created a resolution stating that artists are second responders for the state of California. So hopefully you're all clapping for yourselves right now. All right, next slide. So I'm going to give you an update on where these relief grants stand. So, you know, a lot of times people think the funding is, we're done, check the box, we got the funding, but really advocacy continues. After the funding is acquired, we have to hold the agency that receives that funding accountable to make sure it actually implements it in a way that is accessible and equitable for the field. And really is the C4, the lobbying organization, kind of creates these ideas around what we need based on what we hear from you in these types of conversations. And then the C3 helps provide the technical assistance, again, so you can bridge to get to that funding. So this is where Terry Ball here is our grants manager on these 3 programs. The California Venues Grant Program is $150 million for live event venues, providing up to $250,000 in support. It is currently closed, but it is pending a reopen because in this last year, we worked on what they call cleanup legislation to be able to make sure that it actually gets to more people that the legislation was intended for. So if you're someone who thinks that you should qualify in terms of being a live venue or performing arts organization that provides live events, then you want to keep in touch with us, and Terry's going to put, that information will be available afterwards in terms of her contact information. Also, there's the Nonprofit Performing Arts Grant. That is currently open, and we encourage you to apply for that as well. If you're a nonprofit performing arts organization with a budget under $2 million, you can apply for up to $75,000 in payroll support. This is a workforce development bill budget allocation. And again, we can provide technical assistance and support for you. So these are currently available, and this is open right now. And then finally, I mentioned a minute ago, there had been $50 million allocated a couple of years ago through the California Relief Grant Program for cultural institutions. If you remember, the California Relief Grant Program provided grants up to, I think it was $25,000 in $5,000 and $15,000, $25,000 increments. We fought for cultural institution specific funding with no cap on the amount of your revenue. we were able in this last year to convince the Office of Small Business Advocate, or SBA, that that funding should remain in cultural institutions and not be absorbed by the general budget, because we continue to be, particularly for performing arts, one of the hardest hit industries continued from the impact of COVID. And so it looks like we will be seeing that reopen at some point soon, and we'll keep you posted. Next slide. I mentioned again the Equitable Payroll Fund. This was Senate Bill 1116, very much in response to the impact of Assembly Bill 5, which really made it very difficult for performing arts organizations to hire folks as independent contractors going forward. So we're talking about choral groups, symphony orchestras, theater companies, dance companies. And we've been hearing about this for years. We've been trying to address this as a problem, and how could legislation solve that. And a really amazing group of really primarily grassroots folks came together. We were advising and supporting. It ended up being sponsored by Actors Equity and Theater Producers League of Southern California, and with the principal Martha Dempson as their board president, really is the architect behind this. It was really exciting when the governor signed it. However, this remains, like cultural districts used to be, what we call an unfunded mandate. So you'll see where we're going to turn in terms of our advocacy priorities in the next year or so. And then the California Paymaster program was something that, again, we got in the budget a couple of years ago. This is again in response to the impact of AB5. If any of you are have experienced that, and you all of a sudden went from an all-volunteer organization, or where you're given stipends out of maybe a board chair's, a checkbook, and then all of a sudden now you have to make payroll and include workman's comp and unemployment insurance and all of these things, and you're really not prepared to do that, a paymaster becomes the employee or employer of record. Californians for the Arts was awarded the contract through the California Arts Council. We have not received a contract yet, but it's coming soon, and we should be commencing with that program early next year. So if you are under $2 million performing arts organization that needs to provide payroll services, and that is really beyond your capacity as a small organization, this is a program for you. And again, we encourage you to reach out to Terry to get on that list to make sure that you can know when that opens up. Next slide. And very exciting, and Eliza Tudor is there, and she's going to tell you more about what's happening specifically in your region in terms of the Creative Core program. But this was again something in our organization, worked with a number of other folks to lobby the administration around. In the height of the pandemic, we were saying, artists, cultural bearers, arts organization, nonprofit arts organizations are who you should be working with and leaning on to help communities to rebuild and to spread messages that will help us to change our behavior in healthier ways. That includes things around climate, that includes around the pandemic or public health, it includes around emergency preparedness, civic engagement, social justice. And so we're excited to have seen that not only was this originally presented in the governor's budget, but then it was increased over that budget cycle to $60 million. It is the largest single appropriation to our state arts agency, the California Arts Council, and 14 administrating organizations by region were allocated close to $5 million each. And Eliza will tell you more about that and how you can get engaged in this really, really wonderful program that it can really change the course of how arts and artists and cultural bearers are perceived in terms of your local community as well as the state government, in a very, very innovative program. Next slide. I mentioned the California Creative Workforce Act, and I realize this is a lot of information, and I just want you to know you'll be getting this slide deck as a follow-up. So, and you'll be able to, of course, anytime reach out to any of us on the team and ask us any specific questions. But the California Creative Workforce Act was signed into law on January 1st. It establishes creative workforce development as a state priority. And it really has the tenets of the bill around earn and learn living wage opportunities through the California Arts Council in coordination with the California Workforce Development Board, with a priority for populations that have faced barriers to employment. And so within our industry. So it's really also a bill that is working on equity to see more equitable allocations and workforce development for our sector. So we'll be working this year to also hope to get funding for that, as it remains currently unfunded. Can't really make it a state priority for creative workforce development until we see the money. I just wanted to mention too, for those of you who applied during COVID for pandemic unemployment assistance, Senator Allen, who also authored the California Creative Workforce Act, has just got this bill signed that the Employment Development Department, or EDD, a state agency, will conduct a feasibility study that examines the idea of extending unemployment insurance benefits to self-employed individuals. And that's great because so many, even with AB5 in our state, there still remains independent contractors, particularly artists, people engaged in the industry. And we want to see what kind of benefits can we continue to see for this sector, because we learned during the pandemic how really vulnerable our workforce is. And we want to ensure that this doesn't continue into the future. And so much of our work is to ensure that this workforce is valued and supported and invested in. Next slide. And cultural districts, $30 million. Like I said, it took only 7 years to get this funding. It was actually in early 2020, the governor put in funding for cultural districts. It was $8 million, and then COVID hit, and of course, everything changed. So it was really exciting to see in this last budget cycle that passed around July, that $30 million was included. That will be invested originally both in the existing 14 pilots, of which Eureka is one cultural district, as well as expanding the cultural districts program across the state of California. So we're really excited to see that and look forward to working with the Arts Council to amplify this and to ensure that communities across California will be represented as cultural districts. Next slide. $25 million went to state parks this year. This grant program is not yet open. It will likely be open in the first quarter of next year. We are in touch with Parks and Rec and make sure that everyone will be aware of this. This is really to partner with organizations, nonprofits, foundations to provide direct grants to develop art installations in parks throughout California. So wonderful, again, to see a lot of our strategy too has been to ensure that arts are not siloed into one state agency, but are really seen across all ways to develop not only artists' ability and to access jobs, but also to see us as part of the solution to making a better and healthier California. Next slide. And then maybe some of you are very excited to know that Prop 28 was passed as a ballot measure in these last on November 8th. Overwhelming support. It received no opposition. And this is approximately about $1 billion a year for arts education. This is now mandated that it must go to arts education. Of course, this goes to the California Department of Education, which then goes to your local control funding model. In other words, your local school districts will be responsible for distributing these funds. This just got signed or passed as, as a ballot measure. We don't have a whole lot of details yet. The funds would not be available until July of next year, 2023. So stay tuned. We work very closely with Create California, which focuses on arts education, and we'll be bringing you webinars and other ways that you can engage to learn how to advocate for this funding in your and hold your local school districts and the California Department of Education accountable for this ballot measure that the voters approved. In addition, I just wanted to mention that also this last year's budget included $3.5 billion, that's B with a bill, for billion, for arts and music block grants. Again, this will go to the local control funding model. However, it's a little deceptive in the title in that it doesn't necessarily mean that all $3.5 billion will go only to arts and music, as you'll see in the slide, which might be difficult for you to read where you are. But if you look at line 4, for example, operational costs, including but not limited to retirement and healthcare cost increases, could also be allocated. So in other words, again, this is going to take advocacy in your local school districts to ensure that some of this funding that will be distributed will go to arts and music, as well as but that, you're going to see that they're going to need it for other things potentially. So you want to ensure that you're there to say why arts and music should be funded. Next slide. Hey, I think I did it right in the amount of time I was supposed to do it in. So I think I'm going to stop now, and maybe Tracy's going to take the mic and walk around the room and see if anyone has any specific questions for me or anyone else on the team regarding some of the stuff I just presented to you, or comments. It's not to be a question, it could be a comment too.
So we have the unique opportunity of having this professionally recorded. With that in mind, we have to use the mic to field your comments and questions. So we've got two options for you. If you're willing to come up and speak into that mic, that would be really helpful. And we have one to pass around as well. So I'll help with that. And with the wireless microphone, just be sure not to point it at the speakers. Thanks. Any questions or comments for us on some of these updates? Say that in the mic. And then we have a question here. Thank you, Eliza. Go ahead.
I have a quick question about Prop 28, and I know it's new and it just came out, but I was wondering, it said 1%, only 1% of it would go to certified or classified employees. Does that mean that the funding will be open to like nonprofits within the community that are doing arts education that are not classified or certified, but are teaching artists?
That's probably the number one question we get. It's actually 80% goes to classified or certified teachers, and 20% can go to non-classified or certified, which would and other things as well. So again, it will really depend on your community. One of the things that we know is going to be happening is that there is a shortage of certified and classified arts education teachers throughout the state of California. So both Create California and our organization and others are looking at what are some of the sort of short-term things that we can do in order to ensure that the props intention is realized while we're feeding more to create more teachers, certified and classified teachers. So again, I think, yeah, stay tuned, but it can be up to 20%.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there any terminology or language translation in terms of policy? Great. In the back, Katrina's running to you now. Thank you so much, Eliza, for your comment reflecting on just the great successes. As Julie often says, arts advocacy is not a one organization, one person job. It's really all of us working on this. Great.
Sorry. I just wanted to hear more about how cultural districts are defined and what requirements would be in place for people that are interested in becoming a cultural district.
Great. Julie, can you field that one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the verbiage in front of me, and I apologize in terms of how has been designated in the past and defined in the past. And certainly we can send that as a follow-up. But the program is new, and so the California Arts Council has not yet released any kind of guidelines. I know that they've been convening the 14 pilots, as my understanding, and seeing what their priority needs are first, because they've been districts without any real funding on all of these years. And so I think they're going to prioritize the existing, and then they'll expand it in learning also. And there's also was a terrific study done, I think it was in 2018, that really looked at what the how the first round was rolled out, and what are some of the considerations that they need to make once they reopen it. So all of those resources we'd be happy to provide in a follow-up email.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I guess we have to acknowledge that we're very fortunate that we have Assemblymember Wood and Senator McGuire representing us. I understand that the leaders here, but still, I want to do some advice going forward. How can we build our local capacity to make sure that our lists are going forward?
Great question. I'll let
We couldn't hear that. Sorry.
Oh, you couldn't hear that. Okay, thanks. That's okay. Sean was acknowledging Assembly members Wood and McGuire for their persistent support of the arts. And he's wondering what they can do locally to build their capacity and then their collective voice.
Who's they? The advocates in the room?
Yep.
Great. Yeah. So we, number one, thank you for that question and thank you for the acknowledgement. First thing you can always do is acknowledge when your elected officials are in support, particularly of the arts and of your industry. Tag them, thank them, send them notices, etc. They're currently in district right now. They'll be going back on December 5th. Woo, I don't know what's going on the screen. They'll be going back on December 5th. For a potential emergency session, and they're going to be sworn in, all the new elected officials. But they're mostly in district right now until January. So I encourage you to reach out to them if they just got reelected or they're newly elected. Certainly introduce yourself, introduce your programs, tell them how important the public funding has been to ensure that, and CAC support or whatever else, particularly if you've got relief funding through SBA, any of the other things, do let them know that the public funding has been instrumental. I know that for myself, living in a rural community and prior to coming to Californians for the Arts, I ran a performing arts center in Grass Valley, is that their philanthropy is often limited in our rural communities, and public funding is what we are dependent upon in order for us to be able to realize some of our arts and culture programs and really ensuring that arts has access for all. So I think in making sure that you're consistent with that message, that you're consistently informing them and educating them to both your impact and your needs. So, and how you can, again, help them to realize success for their district. In terms of next year, and we're about to we'll go into sort of some of our priorities of what we're looking at in terms of advocacy priorities for next year. And those are things also, and when we get to the part where we want you to really share, is that it is also really important for us to hear what's going on for you in your community so that we can ensure that advocacy is representing your needs as well. So if all the things that we're talking about today don't really don't resonate or aren't things that are going to help your community to be more successful in terms of providing arts and culture for everyone, then we need to understand what more could be done that public policy or public resources could support. But for right now, I think it's really making sure that you are communicating with them on a consistent basis. And then you'll have an opportunity in April to join us for Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month, where we will be both convening in Sacramento for a lobby day where you'll be able to, if you can come down, meet with your legislators in Sacramento, as well as some learning opportunities. And we will be working with Create California on that summit in April. So you'll be learning more about that very, very soon. We're just firming up some of the logistics on that. But right now it's looking like, and you're going to get the first preview April 17th in Sacramento.
Thanks, Julie.
We're checking a mic out.
Test. Okay, great. I just want to acknowledge that Assemblymember Wood's local representative, Aaron Dunn, is here in the room. So just thank you so much, Aaron, for being here. So no pressure. There's a 15-minute break. Everyone can talk to Aaron. And then also Libby Maynard and Swan Asbury are here too. And they were both really fundamental in establishing the City of Eureka Cultural District. So there's some really great lived experience and knowledge here in the room. So definitely, if folks have questions about that, you can reach out to folks here and we'd have a team actively working on it. And then in terms of continuing to be involved, we do have a group, the Humboldt Creative Alliance, which is an ad hoc group of arts and culture organizations and people who are passionate about the arts. That is a way of kind of remaining involved and kind of we've organized some advocacy efforts locally, and we are planning a trip to Sacramento, dates to be decided. So there's some opportunities for folks here to be involved.
Great. Any other questions or comments on the advocacy updates? We'll be moving into talking about policy priorities for the coming year.
And I just want to say, Leslie, try and do that with us in April if you can. And also, one of the things you can encourage your elected officials to do is join the Joint Committee on the Arts. We have essentially an arts caucus here in the state, and we'd love to have more representation, particularly from rural communities on those committees.
I think, I think we can shift over to the upcoming policy priorities. Thanks.
Great.
Judy.
Thank you. All right, this is fun. Here we are, hybrid. We're making it work. Thanks, everyone. So just an overview, I'm going to do my thing where I changed my glasses. Okay, so I'm the CEO of two organizations, California Arts Advocates, Californians for the Arts, which was what I was, and now I'm going to go into California Arts Advocates. So we'll be yellow for California Arts Advocates today. And that is our lobbying organization. And we do have a lobbyist in Sacramento, a terrific firm we've been working with for almost 8 years. And that in your membership, if you are members of California Arts Advocates, helps us to have a lobbyist and be that voice for representation in Sacramento to influence, again, what's going on there. Overall, our policy goals for California Arts Advocates are to support a sustainable and thriving arts, culture, and creativity, creative industries. We want to look at how do we create social protections for the creative workforce, things like that pandemic unemployment assistance that we saw, or things like the impact of AB5 and how do we ensure that arts workers are paid a living and hopefully thriving wage in the state of California. How do we look at things around housing and issues around healthcare that we can ensure that this workforce accesses. Specifically, there is unfortunately a long history and almost a romanticization of the starving artist. And really, that's something we want to eradicate. We want to get rid of this idea that artists, should be starving. Artists should be thriving. Artists should be paid for the value of what they do and what they bring to our communities. And finally, they should be invested in. And so that's a really important policy goal of ours, to continually not only educate policymakers to the impact that artists and cultural bearers and arts organizations on all of you do in your communities, but why it's really critical that this is not seen as an extra, but is seen as something integral to our communities and to the success of our communities. But that doesn't mean we say, hey, can you do that for exposure, or can you do that for 10 cents on the dollar? But we really value what this work is, including the creative process and how that could be akin to research and development, and how important it is to observe and to support the creative process. Along our policy goals also include fighting injustice and fighting for racial and cultural equity. And that includes things like cultural districts and ensuring things like the Senate Bill 628, the California Creative Workforce Act, really helps to diversify our workforce. We believe that policies that we can support will affect that arts and culture affect social change. We know that, we've seen it historically, and we will continue to see that. And as we continue to face other issues along climate change and other things that are really impacting every person in our state, arts and culture have a role to play in this. And it is our job to not only, again, educate policymakers to what is that role that arts and culture can play in solving these great problems for our state, but why it's important to invest in our sector. And finally, for the state of California, we have an amazing state. I mean, there's 40 million people in the state. 30, I think the minority are Spanish speakers. I think it's 35%, 39% of the state of California primary language is Spanish. We have incredible cultural diversity, our indigenous tribes. We have communities, if you say they're Latinx, inside of a Latinx community might be 20 different cultures. This is something we should support, celebrate, and lift up. And we really believe that will help to ensure racial and cultural equity as well, and how that can reflect an inclusive California art history and identity. So those are some of the things that we look to do when we're shaping our policy goals as the lobbying organization. Next slide. What informs our policies? We have an amazing 24-person board across the state of California. Folks who sit in those seats really are there to help represent the voices of their communities. And we're very specific in terms of geographic diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, and sexual orientation. And so we want to ensure that as many voices are at the table as we're developing our policies, but we also really rely on you And that's why these regional conversations have been a very, very important part of our program development. And this is the 4th iteration. And the first one, as you know now, partly in person. So we have a summary that you can review that we did earlier this year, regional conversations. We're going to move them now to the fall on an annual basis. But we would learn from that. We learned from the impact of these relief programs. I mean, unprecedented amount of money has gone into arts and culture in the last couple of years in the state of California. What can we learn from that? Not only in terms of how can we do better, but what else is missing? Where are the gaps? And that informs our policies. There was a terrific study that's in process by Wolf Brown, which is a consulting company hired by the California Arts Council. And they looked at what's been happening in the state of California in terms of grant making, where are the funds going, who's not getting resources, and where's philanthropy, supporting arts and culture, where are they not? I don't think I have to share with you that when you're in a rural community, again, this is much harder. And so, that's something we look at and we analyze, and lots of studies out there to support our work and understand it. So some of the things that we've learned in these last couple of years, and we hear in the regional conversations, as well as all these other stuff that I mentioned, is, for example, that a lot of people continue to ask for grant writing assistance, and influencing how what the grant applications look like. How can we make them more accessible for people? So you don't have to have a master's in grant writing in order to apply for a state grant. But also, if you're, for example, a lot of the relief programs really relied on not so much a narrative as maybe the state arts agency does, but more on business practices. And do you have really good business records? And one of the things we also learned is that a lot of our arts and culture nonprofit organizations and some of our for-profit really are needing assistance on providing that in a way that we can make sure that we can continue to access resources and access to capital. We know, again, that funding based on all these studies that we can cite are really not reaching our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, persons of color communities, our rural communities at the same level as they're concentrated in areas like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Jose, the Bay Area, and so on, San Diego to some degree. So, and also that we, continue to look at what are the grants looking like. And we hear a lot from our communities in regional conversations that the grants are really, really challenging. They're really difficult to apply for. And sometimes people just opt out. They just say, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources. And so what we're also finding is that some of these programs that we fought so hard to get funding for are what we call undersubscribed. That's not true of the California Arts Council, but we've seen a little bit of this through our programs of SBA, the Small Business Advocacy Organization, the state agency. So we want to ensure that you have the capacity, the resources, the knowledge in order to apply for these amazing things that we're all fighting for. Again, we know that the impact of AB 5 continues to be a hardship for many, particularly performing arts organizations. And we also know, again, for performing arts in particular, and maybe that's other aspects of our sector as well, that COVID continues to be an issue. We know that audiences are just not coming back at the same level. And this is continuing to be a potential crisis and really concern coming next year as the relief funds dry up. Philanthropy seems to be a little bit tired. And if audiences aren't coming back, what does this look like for our organizations and how are we going to continue? And these are the things that we want to not only shape in terms of policy, but again, in terms of education. So if this resonates with any of you, these are the sorts of things you want to tell your assembly member, your state senator, your local elected officials. Again, not because we want to say, hey, woe is us, complain, but more to really illustrate what's going on. And in turn, what is your impact in your community, both economic and social, and why that's critical that it continues to, I can't imagine a community without arts and culture. Can you? What would we have? And so we want to ensure that we retain and maintain that. And some of the things I mentioned already, thriving wages for the creative workforce, social safety net solutions. A lot of times we hear about access to affordable housing and creative spaces. We're also hearing a lot of movement towards ownership of your space for your organization. What does it take to own your space, to build equity as an organization? One of the things we've also focused on is a deeper understanding for both our sector as well as for community and economic development leaders to understand what is our value in our work there and how we can intersect and be a part of those solutions. And you'll hear some of that today, which we're really excited to be partnering with folks from California Forward and the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, who've been really amazing strategic partners in ensuring that arts and culture are at the table. And then finally, we've also heard a need, and maybe the gentleman who mentioned, what can we do locally, is that there really needs, and it sounds like Leslie mentioned one group, for regional advocacy infrastructure. We're actually quite a small organization as a statewide organization for arts and culture in the state of California. We've only recently grown to a full-time staff of 5 people. And so it is something that we look at. How do we build the infrastructure for this in a regional way so that we can support you to be successful advocates and effective advocates locally and regionally? And in turn, we can also call on you, because at the end of the day, and I'm sure the Assembly Members representative will attest to this, which is that elected officials are beholden and care about their districts and their local community. And so it really is about what you're telling them, not what I, as the sort of, lobbyist representative, is saying. It really is up to you and lifting your voices to tell them what's going on for us to be able to affect significant, sustained investment and resources for our sector. Next slide. So here's some of the things that we're looking at for the next year. The legislative cycle will start again in January, and the governor will announce his first budget in January by January 10th. For the year. We do know, of course, that things are looking a little bit different than the last couple of years. We don't have the same amount of federal dollars coming in, except for infrastructure. And we don't have also the same amount of relief funding. And the California budget is not coming at the same level. The revenues are smaller than they anticipated. So last count, I think we were $7 billion behind in income tax. So you'll see likely a little bit more conservative budget in the next couple of years. However, one of the most important things, if we are facing any time, is jobs, right? We need to have jobs, and we need to have thriving living wage jobs. And so that again is why we want to see the California Creative Workforce Act funded in the state of California. Let's take this historic bill and let's actually make it into something that we can all be proud of and be a part of. And if you want more information on that, again, I can go great detail on every one of these, but we certainly don't have the time. One of the things we're going to talk about a little bit in the next couple of minutes is your state arts agency, the California Arts Council, which I'm sure there's several state local partners potentially in representation in the room today. Over the last several years, and we have a graph to show it, we've seen that the baseline budget for the Arts Council has remained at $26 million, which is approximately 66 cents per capita. You can go back to the last slide if you wouldn't mind. And that really has, it hasn't increased. And so one of the calls that we're making is to $1, which is would be more like $40 million as 40 per capita. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Performing Arts Equitable Payroll Fund, again, unfunded. We want to look at how do we get funding for these great bills that we worked really hard to get through the legislature and get the governor to sign, but without funding behind them, they really don't do much except for make some establishment of language and socializing the issue. One of the things, again, that we've learned, which I mentioned before, is the technical assistance, the business access to capital needs, the needs to understand how to own your building. These are some of the things that the Office of Small Business Advocate, through their technical assistance programs, can offer. We've been talking to them specifically around how do we create one just for the creative entrepreneur, the creative business person, because we're not like a restaurant. We have a very great diversity in the type of work that we do in our industry, and we want to ensure that there are solutions and resources specifically for our sector. And then finally, this is a model that we've seen in another state that we think is a really interesting thing to look at, which is you know, many of you create strategic plans for your own organizations. Sometimes you have a cultural plan for your community or your region. What we're asking now the state to consider is an actual strategic plan for the whole of the creative industry and economy, and to build a task force for the creative economy with cultural equity task force, and to look at what is the future of the creative industries for the state of California? How do we pull this together, do some analysis at the state level so that we can ensure that there is a thriving and sustainable industry going forward? Next slide. So this just gives you some idea of where we stand in terms of funding for the arts in the state of California. You know, we've come a long way, and you'll see this in the next graph, but there's still more to go, right? We're not there yet. So let's go to the next slide if you could. So this gives you an idea of where we have been for the California Arts Council. So in the year 2000, which is almost 23 years ago, the state arts agency's budget was $30.7 million in baseline funding. If you adjust for inflation, actually today it's probably about $50 million. And again, if you remember now, if you look at the slide and if you can see it, since 2019 grant, budget year, 2019 to 2020, the baseline budget, which is the ongoing funding for the state arts agency, which is the main portion of what they allocate funding to, has remained at $26 million. We've received amazing one-time funding. The Creative Corps is an excellent example of that. There was $40 million for creative youth development and $30 million for cultural districts. All of that we're really excited about. The challenges with that, and I think everyone in the room can attest to that, is when you get one-time funding, the challenge for the Arts Council is that it doesn't come with permanent staff. And so that they are, having to put together these programs with temporary staff, which is hard to hire and hard to keep. Secondarily, without sustained knowledge, knowing that you have sustained investment and funding coming from the state, we're all scrambling to put together programs, but we don't know what the future holds for those. So we really think that a sustained and increased investment of the baseline, where we know the California Arts Council is oversubscribed. Every type of grant is oversubscribed, and many grant programs have ceased because they simply just don't have enough money for the demand in the state of California. This needs to change. I mean, even with the tightening of the budget potentially next year, you're still talking about a budget. This last year was $308 billion for the state of California. Asking for $40 million or $1 per capita is not too much to ask. And it is time for us to come together and make this ask. We need to see this increase. Next slide. This is really exciting and just something I wanted to share with you all. And Leslie was with us in Bakersfield in October. And that was the California Economic Summit is put on by, again, our friends and colleagues at California Forward. It's an annual economic summit. It's really where policy is incubated. Legislators come to it, administration comes to it, the governors come to it every year. And it really helps us to work together to ensure that the creative economy is part of the overall California economy. And so last year when I went to it, we were literally the entertainment. We were, the lunchtime folklorica dance while people were, eating their food, and we were the background music during a cocktail reception. We were not talked as part of the economy. This year, pleased to present that along with our colleagues, Gustavo Herrera and his team at Arts for LA, Californians for the Arts was asked to co-chair the first ever creative economy working group at the California Economic Summit. And this work will continue. And these are some of our priorities as a group: to strengthen a creative workforce and industry that is grounded in equity, prioritize the creative economy as a leading industry in California, integrate arts and culture into local community and economic development strategies, and develop policies to support creative small businesses and self-employed arts workers. So if that's something of interest to you, if you're somebody who's interested in policy development, wants to get a little bit more deeper into what we call the wonkier side of this stuff, feel free to reach out to me, let us know, or anyone on our team, Kara, Tracy, Terry, Eduardo, let us know you want to be a part of it. But it's really exciting and something we're really excited to see moving forward. Next slide. I just want to quickly give you some federal advocacy updates. This alone could be a whole session. And we do serve with a number of different groups where we work on federal advocacy. You know, the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for Humanities, have been, the Senate has put forward 195 million, the House has put forward 207 million. There are letters that you can sign now that you can find in our action alert system, where you can sign on for $207 million to see the increase. And again, but if you think about it, for the entire United States, that we're talking about investments of just around $200 million, again, simply not enough. There's a lot of other things that we're looking at, number of bills that have been introduced, CREATE Act, Creative Act, the STAR Act, Advancing Equity Through Arts and Humanities Act from Congresswoman Barbara Lee that we've been working on in building awareness around. And then the president reinstated the Committee for the Arts and Humanities. So there's really a lot of great momentum happening, both at the federal and state level. I would say that one of the silver linings of these last several years is that we all came together, we raised our voices, we said what we needed, and then we improved how important we are to local, state, and the national economy and to our health and wellness. Now, the point that we need to make is that we are here to stay and we need sustained investment. Let's not have it be, you know, they make one-time investments and then they say, hey, you're good. That's just simply not the case. We know that's not the case. So we want to ensure that you all join us, not as a moment, but really into this movement of prioritizing arts and culture in our state and local economies. Next slide. That's it. There it is. That's all. So much more always to share, but that gives you a quick overview. I hope that was helpful.
Any questions on the policy priorities we laid out, or comments, thoughts, anything we're missing that we should know about, challenges you're facing? Yes.
I guess, hello? Hello. I guess I have a question about how do we get the positions within our rural community that can support arts advocacy? Because what happens is you get artists who are underfunded and overworked trying to do arts advocacy as well. And I'm just thinking about ways that we can get Calder Johnson paid so that he can do arts advocacy for us. So it's a big question for me, and it comes up again and again in the Humboldt Creative Alliance of how do we find time to do this within the many plates that are spinning. So I'm just putting that out there because maybe there's something out there that I don't know about.
Oh, actually, it's a consistent thing that we've been hearing. So one of the things that we're doing, number one, I think it's great. I thank you for speaking up about it. You know, it is something that why we do believe it's important to have a Californians for the Arts and a California Arts Advocates is this is our day job. This is what we do. So it's hopefully you're comforted by the fact that we are there. But again, we can't do it without constituents because that's the grassroots advocacy is really, really critical. We do hear that people say, how can I do this on top of everything else that I'm trying to do? I would argue, if you're running an arts organization, I would say you spend a lot of time on trying to raise money and you have often an emphasis on fund development. I would include government relations as part of your fund development strategy, ensuring that you are developing those relationships with your elected officials, because that could result in more money than you can potentially get out of an individual donor in the long term. In terms of individual artists, one of the strategies that we are working on is actually a new program that is called RAIN, because we know that we need rain in California. So it's called Regional Advocacy Infrastructure Network. We've actually put in a grant to pilot it in 2 communities for right now that reached out to us and asked for our help, which was Sacramento and San Diego in this case. But we hope to expand it, and included in that would be to build out regional advocacy and to look at stipends for people to engage in the work. We understand how difficult it is for people to do it on a consistent basis. But on the other hand, I also just want to say that I think we all know that if we don't engage civically, we won't be able to see our dreams realized. And so it is a balance, and totally understand that. And we will do our best to raise money to be able to support local and regional advocacy, and to ensure that artists are paid to be able to participate as well, because that's really critical.
Great question. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question about whether any of the funding that's out there or programming is targeting, especially when we think about what the percentage of funds are allowed to use for credentialed or certificated teachers. Are there any programs or funds that will target teacher retention, teacher certification? Up in Del Norte, we have so many open teaching positions, let alone the ability to draw arts educators that come with training. So across the field of education, we don't have enough teachers, let alone those specifically trained to teach in the arts. So I'm wondering if there's conversations with our Board of Education, the state board, about addressing a particular issue.
The wireless mic is acting up. Julie, were you able to hear that well enough?
I was, yeah. And it's a great question. And honestly, I was just, again, if you're not following Create California, I would encourage you to also engage with that organization, specifically around arts education. And we work very closely with them on these issues. And I was actually just in a policy committee meeting for them, and this was the conversation. So I think that I think those who are addressing wanting to ensure that every community has access to arts education, and particularly with the Prop 28 passage, understand that this is going to also need to trigger investment in arts ed teachers. And I also hear what you're saying. And generally, I happen to be on the school board in my community, so I understand exactly what you're saying. Off the top of my head, I don't know if and I'm sure there's some funding that, whether it's through our community colleges or others, but I can't answer that with an informed, anything great with information. So it's a great question, and I've noted it, and that's exactly what we want to hear. Tell us what are the gaps, tell us what we don't know, what are the areas we need to explore deeper. So please, others, thank you for that question.
I have a real small follow-up, and it's along the same lines as building the infrastructure in our community for the arts, being able to provide arts experiences along with arts education. Is we simply operate piecemeal. We have everyone knows everyone, and everyone has small pots of money, but it's hard to gather everyone for a long-term strategic plan. So I'm hoping that, as you said, the state of California would like to develop a fund for a strategic plan for the state, but I'm wondering if there's any funds for our local strategic planning, because first of all, we need the infrastructure. We need to identify the artists and the other funding sources that we can pull together. And so many people are part-time, doing it as a side gig, don't see how to support a lifestyle out of it. We definitely need support to help them be participants on the share a long-term goal for our community.
I mean, I hope that there are some folks in the room who also represent state local partners in your community that can address some of that too, because I think that's part of the role of that part of the funding that they get is to convene and is to, right? So if anyone else wants to address that locally.
Tracy, would you like me to? So I'm Eliza, Executive Director of a county arts agency, a county arts council. And we're here in the seat of the Humboldt County Arts Council. And I know for us, it's very important to be participating and facilitating cultural planning efforts at any given time, whether it's measuring the economic and social impacts of the arts or creating an arts education plan in cooperation with the, your county office of education. So all these things state local partners could and should be doing. And so I would say talk to your state local partner locally. We were with Del Norte last night, so we know Stephanie will be ready to go. Talk about what kind of planning you can begin. And is Stephanie here now, actually? Stephanie, there you are. Great. So yes, put your state local partners to work, because that's what we do, is facilitate cultural planning, and educational planning is part of that. Great.
I just want to know, I'm fairly new to California, and I was surprised at the lack of resources at their local library with state, like interlibrary loans across the state and things that I anticipated being available. And I feel like, where does that fall into the arts? And how can that interface? Because that's a very valuable resource in the community. It seems like there's a lot of online things through the libraries that could be available for our rural communities.
Julie?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think, identifying collaborators, people that you can work with is such an important, particularly in a smaller community strategy. And here where I live, for example, our library is amazing and does an incredible amount of programming. And I know Eliza has done work with them as well as the local arts council. So I think you're right. There potentially are resources there. So identifying collaborators, and I think that again with your local arts council is that sort of as that other person mentioned, that idea of planning. How do you bring the ecosystem together? We often operate very much siloed in our sector because there's so many segments to who we are and what we do, and I think that there's real power in us coming together and building coalition and representing where we can as a unified voice in our objectives and our asks. And so part of the work that we hope to do in terms of building advocacy infrastructure is to support regions to come to what are those priorities together, and then work on a plan to see how you can really affect change so that you can get towards those goals. So that's some of the stuff that we're trying to accomplish in our larger strategic overall goals. But I know that, again, there's resources, I'm sure, locally for this too.
Great. We've got time for maybe one or two more comments. If anybody could offer some other insights on gaps. Anything else? Great. Okay. So one, I just want to acknowledge that a lot of the questions that you're asking are really emblematic, really reflect the shift in our field as a whole in terms of systems thinking, coalition building. For so long, we were so focused on program and our individual programs, and hearing how you're all thinking of supporting each other, that's the growing edge of our field. And just want to acknowledge and honor that. And your questions, your comments, your insights are really valuable to us as we drive this conversation forward. So thank you. We are going to, in just a second, say goodbye to the CFTA team in virtual land. And I'm going to direct your attention to a survey that we'd like to have you take. And then and during that survey time, we'll also take a physical break. Okay, so Juan, and thanking again, Juan and Access Humboldt for just managing this. And if you would share the team, so the team, we can thank the team, the Californians for the Arts team, a round of applause or hoots and hollers. And Terry, cool. Yay. And you guys, this worked really well. Pretty cool, pretty cool, pretty cool. And you're, and it's great to be in the room with everybody and hear the resonance and the response. And oh my gosh, we've missed you. We've missed you. So thank you guys. See you soon.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate how important the survey is for us. So please do take it, share it with other folks. You don't have to be in this particular room in order to do it. And thanks everyone. Sorry we're not there with you, but have a great rest of the afternoon. And we hope to see you in Sacramento in April, if not sooner. So take good care.
And there's one more slide. Kara's gonna send us off just with how to stay involved with us. If Eddie could fire that up for a second.
Great. Yeah, thanks. I'll leave you with how to get involved and stay involved with many of the things that Julie discussed. And also I'll kick it off with a reminder that these slides and resources that we mentioned today will be shared with you. They'll be shared with everyone who registered with the event today. But you can stay involved with our work by first and foremost becoming a member. Members are really important to the work that we do. We have levels for individuals as well as organizations. You can also engage with us on social media, share our posts, tag your legislators in our posts and in your reposts. As Julie mentioned, you can join the Creative Economy Working Group. You can provide public comment on your local level, at the city council level, even about the importance of the arts or the work that you're doing within the space of arts. You can get involved in regional advocacy, as we discussed a little bit about. And also you can ask us about our consulting services to help do that. As Julie kind of seeded a little bit, we're really working on providing those services to bolster advocacy across the state and in regions. And we know how important it is in rural areas. And can't emphasize enough that we hope you will join us in advocacy during the month of April. We'll be doing digital campaigns as well as convening folks in person for a summit as well as a lobby day in Sacramento in April. And this deck will also have all of our contact information as well. So you'll know how to get in touch with us if you have questions about any of this. And we just want to thank all of our members, board members, and our funders. So with that, we will leave you in the very capable hands of our colleague Tracy and our amazing partners, Leslie and Jemima, and our partner and board member, Eliza. So we hope you all have an amazing rest of the day.
Great. Thank you. The best way to access any of those opportunities to stay connected is on the backside of your program, signing up for newsletters on our website, and we can keep you informed of all of that. And then without further ado, what I'd really appreciate is if you wouldn't mind popping open on your phones our survey. I'm going to share a slide real quick. Give me just a second. I'm going to pop open the slide. On the back of your program, you can type in the bit.ly address, and also you received a confirmation email with that link. This survey is really vital data to us. It helps us with our case making. It helps shape and prioritize our advocacy work. And we've got maybe a 10-minute break between the survey and giving yourself a body break. Does that sound good?
And I just want to say, I did check in with the city manager, and your cars will not be ticketed today if you're in 2-hour parking. So yeah.
Great. What's that, dear?
Are you gonna put up a link or no?
I was going to, I just have to share my screen here. Okay, thank you. I think I can stop recording now, correct? Question mark.